Yeah, this is what I call unhinged retardation. Not this guy. This guy, advice from Lewis, is talking about how people are using the fact that a black family's house uh, was literally fucking burning down, and they were moving out of it with police and medical professionals helping them out, um, as an excuse to be racist to black people because they're 12 years old, and have no intelligence of their own, and think that they will not face consequences ever in their life for their blatant disregard for their fellow human beings. This is why social media was a mistake, in my opinion. Just all these are 12-year-olds. These are all literal children. This guy as well. The idea, also the idea of a Christian getting racist because a black dude is mad that at actual fucking racism. Like, there's a difference between I'm gonna be honest. There's a big difference between like George Floyd being an actual piece of shit who is, who's still murdered, but it's not like I'm gonna pretend George Floyd was a good guy, to a person who's legitimately just upset at the shit that people are slinging. That is not cool at all, right? What's funny is what this ends up doing is all this really ends up doing is trying to egg people to kill each other. That's really what it comes down to. Every single one of these is basically what I call cry bullying. It's behavior Grums is also known for. It's when you poke a bear and then get mad that the bear poked back and has claws. Is really what it comes down to, right? Like sometimes, there are legitimate problems with the black community. I think the response to George Floyd with all the rioting and looting was completely uncalled for, right? And I think that's a fair thing to say, and we should have said that. Fucking honestly, we should have. Like, I'm not black, but y'all should have fucking said that, right? Yeah, they had legitimate reasons to be upset, but at the end of the day, you got to admit that rioting didn't actually solve anything. I mean, if it did, then how come the only person that went to jail? Yeah, it was the only one who actually did anything criminal, but it also means that your riots had absolutely zero effect to the conclusion, right? And also on another contrary part, right? The police who were in Uvalde without rioting being required were also put in prison because, as it turns out, you know, uh, like the rioting doesn't affect the outcome. Basically, it's just a way to relieve stress, and it's not a good way to relieve stress because it makes more stress later on. Don't riot against like problems that don't personally affect you. It's a good way to go, right? But yeah, this is bullshit, right? Like I remember hearing the shit he's talking about too. Like I grew up in a black community. I'm not going to sugarcoat the amount of dog shit a lot of newspapers have said. It was very disgusting and harmful, and it really doesn't actually have any basis in truth, right? People be like, what about the FBI statistics? How about we look at the actual statistics then? What percentage of people are in jail, right? Well, not very large, right? So a very small percentage of people are even criminals in the first place, right? So that's where I call it doesn't matter the criminal statistics because they're irrelevant on the non-criminal space, right? The average person is not a criminal. So if the average person is not a criminal, the criminal rates don't fucking apply because the average person in any race is not a criminal. Um, it turns out there's also a very easy statistic you can like prop up because people say per capita, but they don't understand what per capita is. So I'm going to show you like the actual like what per capita statistics actually look like because a lot of people think it's two variable statistics. What two variable statistics is you take the variable of people who do something and the variable of total people, right? These are two different variables. And you use that to say something, right? It is what's known in statistics as the most worthless kind because it doesn't actually point to problems or solutions. It just says, that some things affect, like when you include the people who don't do bad shit, it changes percentages, which is a completely worthless like thing to value in a statistic because it tells you nothing but that the value changes if you add the people who don't do shit, right? Which it's still a very small percentage of people who do, so those percentages really mean nothing, right? At the end of the day, that's what that really comes down to. If the percentage, if the variable you're talking about ends up being an outlier itself, then you can either focus entirely on the outlier or you look at the whole picture, which isn't just those two variables, but also other variables such as income, gender breakdown, age brackets, parenthood, right? And the reason why I'm getting at that is the actual rate, like the rate of white or black, it doesn't matter. Criminals is pretty much like about 90% of of all criminals are impoverished single family home, right? Individuals who live in a violent community already, right? As in the violence begets violence after all, right? It's learned behavior after all. It's not genetic, it's cultural. Right? So, it also like has to do with like bad schools, which when you're in a poor community because, whatever that's violent in itself, you tend to have a bad school and so many other things. You combine all of that, you get 90% of that, especially at a young age, are criminals. Well, that's what the position, that's the, also happens to be where like a lot of that, 1352 statistic comes from because 50 black people live in those communities a lot more often than any other group of people. So when they live in that situation, the situation where the vast majority of crime is committed from people who live in that particular situation, well, then you have your answer as why like the black community is more violent. It's a lot of variables put together, but it basically goes down to we aren't treating black people okay, right? Like that's ultimately what that statistics boils down to per capita. We aren't treating black people actually okay. And yes, per capita is not just comparing a population and an outlier statistic like like whatever, right? Like it's comparing all of the data at once. That's per capita, as in it's multivariable, not just two. All the variables that affect the outcome. And when you do that, you realize that the problem is, oh, hey, yeah, this is just very shitty living conditions. It was like it's not just that; it's obviously very complicated, but it's not race. Like it doesn't matter the skin color; it matters the conditions. And of course, a lot of people on these like shitty fucking like bullshit on the internet try to clap back with, well, what about like name a very poor country in Africa that is often like this because the United States blew them down next to Sunday because some like Muslim was selling crack or something. So we just decided to destroy the entire town. Yeah, they were impoverished partially by the conditions of the environment. It turns out a lot of the places in Africa just don't have a lot of resources to begin with, and also a lot by military invention from other invading countries. Right, so like it still is other people, not necessarily all other people, because as it turns out, when you create those conditions, one the problem that arises a lot is the government that they end up having, right? Is very much like you ever like hear of like the outlaw culture, the wild wild west, right? Outlaw culture, of course, was basically like a criminal would take over a town, and then they would basically all be at the mercy of a violent thug. Well, when that, if you create thugs, that's who's gonna be who's in charge. That's just how that works, right? And this was a problem that we had to deal with a lot of white people back in the day, right? It's what all those cowboy movies are about. It's about not all the stories are true, but they're kind of based off of the reality that a lot of criminals would take over towns, and it was often a white criminal back in those days, right? Because black people didn't really have exactly rights to own firearms in order to take over said towns. So it's not really like a race thing historically or any other way that you can look at it. It's resources, means, intelligence levels, which are largely based off of resources and means, and other things as well. Now, that doesn't mean that the people who loot or whatever have an excuse, as this guy calls out in the video. He's not excusing that behavior. He's saying, "Hey, look, why are you talking about me when I didn't do that shit?" Right? Because this is really the problem with like all this racism and all that shit. We're not talking about individuals. We're talking about tribes. That's retarded. Like you're going back to retardo mode to be racist, right? This is retarded behavior. This is mentally retarded behavior. This is what I'm just going to call this out. Hyperborean starer, the Schwandfler, like a lot of these are groypers, obviously, right? Disguised bunny, uncommon sense, this fake Christian LARPer who has never read the Bible in his entire life. You are mentally retarded. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That IQ you said Haiti had. You're below that. That's also Haiti doesn't have that IQ at half the level. If it did, it would literally function even less than it does. They would not be able to have buildings because they would be retarded. That's what a sub 70 IQ is. A sub 70 IQ isn't dumb. It's retarded, and that's what you are. Because dumb is like completes high school, right? That's where Haiti is. It's like a little bit below high school level, right? That's dumb, not retarded. I don't think you guys can comprehend what a actual retard is because you are so fucking dumb that you don't understand that you are it, right? You guys are retarded. This is retarded behavior. You are mentally retarded. That's what you are, right? That's what racism really is. It's a excuse to not be intelligent for a moment, to mock someone for no other reason, right? Like, mocking behaviors isn't racist. Mocking entire groups of people is, right? It's the same thing like with transphobia, right? Like, when J.K. Rowling says, hey, you probably shouldn't just simp for Ava Chris Tyson's transition. I mean, she was transphobic years ago, and she got all these allegations. She's probably a pedophile. You probably should have listened to her. Just because J.K. Rowling's full of shit most of the time doesn't mean she's full of shit all the time, right? But that's behaviors, not the community. When she tries to equate that to the entire community, she's a bad person, but she's bad due to the retarded inability to distinguish individual human beings, and use the pattern seeking brain properly, which is to seek behaviors, not people, behaviors, and attribute them to outcomes. That's what pattern seeking brains that are healthy do, right? So, like, when this guy is mad that people are being obnoxious retards and to about and lying about shit that's not true and stuff like that. This is what I call a pattern of he's responding to legitimate frustrations, and so the loud tone of voice he has is completely legitimate, and he should not speak in a low, soft tone about this. He should speak up, right? That's how it is, right? That's a pattern-seeking thing of this is positive. He should speak out loud and not so proud about the behavior that's being received upon his community for a couple individuals potentially, and in fact the evidence shows we don't even have none yet, right? And that's another thing, right? Like, people are like, oh, you can just look at statistics. That's not how you do anything, right? Like, statistics, when it comes to people, if it's not actually individual actions, is worthless. Like, it's one part of the reason is, when they say look at statistics, they mean look at two variable statistics, but we'll call it per capita when it's not actually per capita. We don't even have all the census data yet. We just have one little section of it. That is what we call false. It's not statistics either. Two variable statistics isn't statistics. Then what you see on the news also isn't statistics, but it's more useful with one variable because the variable is isolated. It's still not really that useful. It's just propaganda. But using only a second variable is still propaganda, and it's even worse because it's a dumber argument. Because you're like, their actual per capita statistics uses several variables, not just two. And people will be like, wait, two variables, but we only talk about one thing, and that's the thing, right? When you include the total population, that's its own variable, right? So we have the total population, and then we have the total population that did something. So that's two variables. So we look at the race statistics of the total population and the race statistics of the total population that did something. That's not worthwhile because we're only isolating two variables, the race and the people who did stuff, and we're including the total as a way to really, all it ends up proving is that these variables that we're measuring are outliers in society itself, which is why we have prison in the first place. Prisons are for certain societal outliers that we deem harmful to society, right? So we don't deem black people as a whole as harmful. We deem black people who are violent. We also deem white people who are violent because it turns out the problem is the violent behavior of the individual, not this group pattern thing. Because the prison system, as shitty as it can be sometimes, is much more logic-based than any racist will ever fucking want to admit. Because racists don't seek logic, they seek simple solutions that are not actually that simple, and they overcomplicate things that are actually very blatantly obvious. This is what's known as a midwit behavior, which is why I call it retarded. Now, technically, a midwit isn't retarded. They are the dumbest fucking people imaginable. But I like to hyperbolize because it's more entertaining than to insult someone like this. I mean, they're not ever going to respect you anyway. They're fucking morons, right? They're midwits. And yes, this is absolutely midwit behavior. This is why I really don't like a lot of the the pseudo-intellectuals like Mentis Wave, etc. They are legitimately just midwits. They are people who see simplicity where there's actual complexity and overcomplicate simple things. Usually for a political agenda, And usually they don't even ever end up accomplishing it in the long run. Like people are like, oh, Trump won, Trump won, Trump won. And then they realize that nothing that they actually voted for will get done because Trump is supporting H-1B and other things that they don't agree with. They're all probably going to get fired from their jobs. The behavior that they exhibit will make them unhireable in the future. Just saying, you will eventually need to get a job, Hyperion Star, and that will not look good on your employment record. Just saying, that's how it works, right? Eventually, you end up not being anonymous anymore, and your identity is shown, and now people know that you are a fucking loser who is completely unhinged and thinks lesser of his fellow coworkers. And you probably aren't performing that well at work either. And now, you're not performing well at work. You think your coworkers are all dumb doo-doo heads. Well, now, you guess what? You're the dumb doo-doo head who got fired. That's how it works, right? It's just basically when you are online, if you're not on 4chan especially, because on 4chan it's a little more acceptable because 4chan is literally like the retard zone of the internet in the first fucking place, right? The point of 4chan is that it's a little containment zone, right? Like we have containment zones like 4chan, Kiwi Farms, etc. These are good places to vent out your stupid frustrations. But when you do this in a social forum where actual people are involved, all you end up doing is showing your impossible nature to contribute to society. See, this guy actually has, you can tell by this thing looking at his house and his livelihood that he actually contributes to society because he has this thing known as a job. If you've never had one of those, Hyperbian Star, this is how I know. And the fact is, I know you haven't had one because if you behave like this, you will never get one. This is not how people with jobs behave on the front and front. Let's just say that. You can occasionally be a Dumbo, but eventually, like a good way to say it, right? Remember how Asmongold talked about how, like, you can be edgy, but you eventually have to tone down when you start to make enough money, and then, like, he got caught saying some obscene shit about Palestine, got banned from Twitch, and he's still, edgy, right? He's still edgy, but he's a lot safer with some of his content. Well, the reason why is because while he is, still being critical and stuff of things, he's being less obnoxious and vile about it and hateful because, as it turns out, that behavior is not acceptable if you want to have a retained income. It turns out that while you can be a little edgy, you have to be what's known as safe edgy to really retain a job in the work environment in the first fucking place. And when you do Twitch for a long enough time, it becomes your job. So Asmongold effectively got banned from his job for a couple of weeks and took it upon himself to still be edgy and still be his same political self, but be less obnoxious about certain topics that involve people's well-being and livelihoods. This is how you know that, yes, safe edginess is a product of people actually need to get on with their lives and grow the fuck up. This is why Synthetic Man, for example, is also being a lot less racist lately. You might have noticed that he's toned down quite a lot. It's not because he thinks that the content is bad. It's that he recognizes that he needs to make more money because the economy is so shit. If he wants some nuggies on the table, he's got to help his mom out now. And so in order to help his mom out now, he's got to tone shit down on his channel, which is why while he's still edgy and offensive, he is no longer anywhere near as edgy or offensive as he used to be. This is a product of the real world won't let you be an obnoxious, worthless waste of air. You need to have some standards or you will have nothing. At the end of the day, that's what it gets down to in the nitty-gritty. You have to have some standards to make it in the world. This is a video dunking on racism and calling racists to have no regard for other people in tough times, especially making shit up at that point. retards, but this is also life advice for those retards. Every single one of you who is commenting negatively on this person, you need to actually grow the fuck up and remember that outside of your household, other people around you are also people. And if you behave like that in an actual society, you will not get treated well. This is a similar thing with like a dude who's like upset about like rainbows on children's shirts, right? First off, he's wearing a pink shirt, which is kind of funny. Like he's talking about masculinity going away. And the other thing, of course, is that these are full rainbows with the color indigo. The reason why that's a thing, if you ever looked at a pride flag, there you notice there's only 6 colors. Indigo is missing. A lot of people who are like far right loony conspiracy theorist Christians have tried to say it's because they removed it because of what the color means or whatever, and what it means is kind of like vague as to how it would mean anything. But really, what it comes down to is there's 6 colors on the LGBT rainbow. There's 7 on the actual rainbow. Roy G. Biv, not Roy G. Bv, right? Is the rainbow, right? Now, of course, I see no problem with either, although, toddlers, it's a little weird to have a, gay pride thing on a 2-year-old, I will admit. But a rainbow, especially a rainbow with like a little dinosaur or a shark, and it's an actual rainbow, and also what's funny is it's a dinosaur, and I think I saw like some wood there, like a boat. It's probably like a Christian display, which means it's probably more from the very far right Ken Ham Answers in Genesis crowd, which means that this guy was such a moron. He was criticizing actual far right propaganda on a T-shirt as far left because he doesn't actually know that actual right wing Christians actually like the idea that dinosaurs are real and the Bible is proof of that because evolution must be a lie and stuff. And all that, right? Which is obviously a dumb position. Now, obviously, another thing that I find funny, the reason why these guys use monkeys is because of a failure to understand evolution. Now, the thing is, humans are all apes, right? Like, black people aren't apes, all humans are apes. Also, black people aren't necessarily, like, some less evolved animal. Just so you know, first off, white and black people were around at the same time. This is actually one problem a lot of people have. History has been a little muddied, right? So Homo neanderthalis is actually what white people are. We are actually a more primitive when it comes to species. Now, that doesn't mean less intelligent or anything. In fact, if you understand anything about Homo neanderthalis, that's not what was going on, but they had white skin, whereas Homo sapiens had dark skin, right? And so like the way Homo sapiens kind of evolved was kind of a mix between two species, which had some white people, some black people, right? That's really what it comes down to. Homo sapiens are a subspecies of two different species of human. Homo neanderthalis and Homo sapien, which is like how we have the racial diversity in skin tone and skeletal structure, etc., that we have in one species, while most species don't. That's just how that works, right? It's similar with dogs and cats. Really, like a lot of it is, it's basically a different species that's a subspecies. Is really what a breed really is. And we're kind of like, these are subspecies, but subspecies doesn't mean subhuman. And also, like, species and subspecies are very biological science categories that basically just refer to like ways of visual and genetic similarities, right? So a black person might be a different subspecies than a white person, right? If we want to get down that road. But you also know, because of the way genetics work, that race mixing is positive. That's actually how you avoid genetic contamination. Like if you've noticed, like a lot of the problems that a lot of racial purists have ends up being a lot of vast deformities. That's because in order to keep racial purity, you have to go through this process called incest, and it's not very good for retaining genetic relevance. As it turns out, there's this thing known as biology. It's a science, you should look it up, which basically proves that racism is retarded and race mixing is superior when it comes to establishing proper genetics in the future, because that's how your genetics stabilize. You mix with other different groups, and it helps stabilize your genes for the future, right? If you continue to mix your genes with the same set, you eventually get like some overexposure of the genes, and so they begin to mutate, because that's how mutations happen. By a lot of times, by the way, is the pattern keeps happening. So genetics eventually likes to change patterns. That's like how humans, even multicellular life, I guess, happened in the first place. In order to have sexual reproduction from non-sexual reproduction, you have to have a mutation for that, right? Well, how do we have a mutation for something that doesn't exist yet? Well, like I said, that's kind of how it works, right? Eventually, a gene becomes unstable because the pattern of genetics has been replicated too many times, and and so it changes. And when it changes, that new genetic material becomes new genetic material for something else, and eventually, you compound those mutations enough, you get multicellular life. Another thing is aging is actually another form of evolution in your individual cells. So your age is a mutation that your cells have by replicating your own DNA too many times, and so it eventually, those bonds get weaker, and that's called aging. So you end up drying up, becoming more shriveled. You have less cellular reproduction. You heal slower than you did as a kid, etc. Right? That's literally how evolution works, on like evolutionary genetic destabilization works in your body. That is why quote racial purity is retarded in the first place, because aging is literally what racial purity would be on a societal level, in an individual level, right? You are the product of trillions of little organisms called cells, all inhabiting one space that is called you, right? You are not one single cell. You are trillions of cells. Each of them has their own function and form. Your skin cells don't serve the same functions as your heart cells or your brain cells, for example. Your neurons don't serve the same function as your muscle tissue, right? At the end of the day, recognizing a lot of facts about your own biology can help you realize how fucking dumb a lot of this racism is in the first place. Yes, there are differences in people, both at racial and individual levels. Racial, however, is like as itself is usually more attributed to like things like certain disorders and stuff, because certain racial impurities prop up due to that. For example, more in one race than another, because certain races will mutate, different ways when the genes become unstable than other races, right? Because certain genes will destabilize different ways, basically, depending on what they are. And that is just how it works, right? It's not really random, but it feels random just because of how many variables there are. There's not really anything random about life either, by the way. That's another thing. Randomness doesn't actually exist. It's not a thing. But what it comes down to is, if there's so many variables, you cannot actually perceive them all. It doesn't matter if it's guaranteed to happen. You have no fucking clue, so it doesn't matter, right? Like a good example of this, right, is God knows everything you're going to do before you do it, before you even were born, before the universe was even created. He doesn't force you to do it. However, it's all pre-designed. You're going to do it before you ever know you're going to do it, right? That doesn't mean you aren't the cause of your own problems and stuff. That means that this is all kind of like going to happen. There's no randomness. There's only pseudo-randomness. Anyone who understands computer science also kind of understands this concept. When you implement a rand function, you implement an algorithm that spits out a specific value depending on the seed and the algorithm giving, right? Everyone who's ever programmed knows that there is no such thing as true randomness. It's a fact of computer science, and it's a fact of nature as well. People say Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That has to do with the fact that when you're observing electrons, you need to use electrons to observe them, and electrons, and as well as the atoms that you were using to observe them, interact with those electrons, which makes it impossible to actually, in a way that's impossible to actually know for humans, because the interactions are using parts of everything that were required to make that function work to interact and view them. So you can't actually predict two things at once, because honing in on one makes it impossible to predict the other, right? Accurately. It's not actually random, it's the act of observing that changes these behaviors, right? The act of doing it is what actually creates that randomness. Well, appearance of randomness, like I said. And so that's really what it comes down to with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, because there's so many variables that we cannot really comprehend in our small limited brain spaces, that go into observing something like an electron, that are not in our control. We cannot accurately predict both the position and direction of a electron. So we can't predict where it is and where it's going to be at the same time. We can predict one or the other. That's just how it is. But it's not a randomness. It's a pseudo randomness created by variables we do not have the capacity to understand. These are different things. Now, for simplicity's sake, you can say it's randomness, because you will never actually figure out that pattern. It's just too much data for any mortal mind to comprehend. The only mind that can comprehend that would be, capital G, God. I am very much a Christian, by the way, which is another thing a lot of people who are young Earth creationists will be appalled at, because I, accept actual fucking science, because I'm not some mentally ill child. It turns out Jesus, the guy who created the universe, the heavens and the earth, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, probably didn't deceive us in any way. And considering where the evidence lies, I would say that if Jesus is telling me through his word of creation, because that's another word of the Bible, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth by speaking them into existence. After all, the universe is also the Word, right? In the beginning, the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Basically refers to God's creation of the universe through speaking, right? It's not referring to the Bible necessarily, although the Bible is more the story of God versus the speaking of existence into being is the word of God, right? Like the literal word of God, right? Like the universe is the word of God, the Bible is the story of God, right? Is a good way to say it, right? So the universe itself, what we observe from reality, takes priority, obviously, because God's not lying to us there. Also, the Bible has a lot of metaphors, right? Anyone who will tell you that Psalms is a literal book should probably look up what the word psalm means, because as it turns out, Psalms and Proverbs are Psalms and Proverbs not facts and theorem. They are poetry written by mortal minds trying to comprehend God and His nature, not observations, from God Himself. They are people who are inspired by God to write these, but inspired as in His awe, not inspired as in like moved by directly. There's a different form of inspiration there than most people use to ascribe most of the Bible, right? And that's just how it works. Not every word in the Bible is meant to be taken literally. Some of them are, but not all of them. And so knowing that, I can apply, well, first off, there's two different creation stories in the Bible already. They kind of contradict each other a little bit, and they're very much clearly metaphors for, a lot of topics that people will talk about, right? And it also is inaccurate for how reality actually functions in a lot of ways with the first story. So what we can go by that is it's not a literal creation, it's a metaphor telling us something, right? Now, what would be the metaphor of Genesis 1? Well, first off, it demonstrates the power of God's ability to create the universe in the first place. I mean, that's already like a good way to describe it as a metaphor. I mean, it's He created the entire universe just to create us. That's a very good metaphor, right? God loves us so much, He created the entire universe to have us around. Are we saying it has to be 100% literally accurate to give the spiritual implications of that? Now, I'm just gonna say no, it doesn't. This is why when people try to say it has to be literal to be true, I say no, it does not. There are very much metaphorical / spiritual truths. The real word is spiritual. Metaphorical truth obviously is a weird word to say, but that's really what spiritual truth is. It's metaphorical truth. Spiritual truth means it hits you in the soul, whereas and basically that's what metaphorical means as well. It hits you in the soul, not the concrete reality, right? Like the reality we live in is basically concrete reality. We are not abstracta. Soul is something more abstract. Like this is who you are even before we get to what you are, right? Who you are as a person is very abstract. What you are as a physical object is not. A human being, as a physical construct is very easy and concrete to understand. Well, not really easy, but it's a lot easier than spiritually. Spiritually, most people will not even understand themselves, never mind other people, right? This is also, once again, in the Bible, through a concept of, treating others as you would like to be treated, loving thyself and thy Lord, above so it's love thy Lord as thyself. I mean, love thy Lord first and highest, love thy neighbor as thyself, as in it goes both ways. First off, so that means that you have to love yourself to love your neighbor. That's part of what that actually implies, by the way, as well. And it also means you should love your neighbor as you do yourself. It also says love thy enemies more in the Sermon on the Mount. Because your enemies might go to, suffer for their sins, you should want them to not suffer as a Christian who is of good faith, and so you do things to try to make them not suffer. Now, a lot of people misinterpret this as every Christian must be wholeheartedly charitable to a very obnoxious degree. I'm going to admit, if we take that literally, we must give the homeless man all our fucking belongings is definitely, I don't think that's what the Bible is actually trying to say. It's definitely a little unhinged. So what I would go by is a more spiritual way of reading that, because, that's a good way to go about it, right? So spiritually, it means when someone is less fortunate than you, you should try to take care of them to bring them up to where you are. It's not giving them your belongings, it's giving them the means to the belongings you have. Effectively, you give them the ability to get their life in order so they can also have the same shit you do. Right? You bring people up, you put yourself down, right? Lift each other up, get them out of poverty, but don't put yourself in it to do it, right? Lift everyone up, right? Get everyone up higher, push everyone up, give them those ladders, but don't let them push those ladders down for you. It is basically a good way to go about it, right? It's take care of each other, not suffer for someone else's sake, right? It's a good way to say it, right? And this is why, like, obviously, the Bible is not communistic in any way. Charity is not a virtue of, charity is not a virtue of, it's not a virtue of, force, right? It's a virtue of will, right? You must want to help people in order to truly help them, first off, right? And so, in order to actually want to help people, you kind of have to have in your mindset, right, in your brain, that you actually want to help people. And so that's just how it is. And, it's a very, like, much complicated, subject, the human experience just in general, right? There's a reason why psychology is a soft science, right? A hard science would imply that we knew enough about it at a base that we could start building upon it. Psychology really doesn't have too many bases. We have some things about pattern seeking. All emotions are basically fear and pleasure, right? Every emotion is fear or pleasure. There are no in betweens. Every phobia, every hatred or disgust or whatever is essentially a phobia. Also, a lot of people use the word phobia wrongfully. They try to say irrational because they ascribe the word irrational to the concept of phobia because they heard this in school or whatever. The word phobia comes from the god of panic and Phobos. Panic, people seem to think means irrational fear. It doesn't. Panic means worry. It means anxiety, basically, right? It means to fear something that it has not taken place yet, right? In other words, to observe things and not enjoy them. That's panic, right? It goes along with hysteria. Hysteria is performing actions, i.e., propaganda, which influence panic. That's why they are brothers or twins in Greek mythology. Panic feeds hysteria, which feeds panic, which feeds hysteria, often, right? Hysteria is the propaganda, aka the lies that come out, the hysterics, the hate fuel, all of that, right? Against a group of people, a population. And panic is the irrational, because it is ultimately irrational to value a group of people over the actions of an individual. Because that's another thing. Phobias are all irrational. They technically are. I know I actually did a little lie because I wanted to actually get to this point. Irrationality is when you describe to things that aren't the things, right? Effectively, right? So when you describe patterns of, hey, I saw a black dude and he acted up, to all black people, that's irrational. Now, if you see a black dude start to act up and a white dude start to act up and you react to, oh, these are bad behaviors, these are the patterns I'm recognizing in that individual, I'm going to avoid that because I don't want to deal with that today, that's what's known as effective rational prediction. Irrational prediction is viewing it not on behaviors that are observable within the individual, but tribalistically, which is why we use the term phobia, because they are all irrational. Anytime you describe groupthink, it is inherently irrational all the time. This is how it is. It is inherently irrational to ascribe groupthink to an entire group based off the actions of a outlier group, effectively of that group, right? And that's just how it is. All of these statistics on whatever are ultimately outliers of that group. And because they are outliers of that group, we should treat them as outliers of that group. So black people who act up are not every black person, they are those black people who are acting up. Or in other words, they're those people who are acting up. Because the problem is that they're acting up, not that they're black. Right? So that's what we should actually describe. Which is basically just a long-winded way to say what this guy said himself. I described it, I'd say, with a lot more words, but we'll just let him say them, because ultimately it doesn't matter how verbose or simple we get. This is ultimately what a lot of people need to hear.
I am tired of people speaking negatively about the black community. I'm tired of seeing fake headlines painting black people in a bad light to get some attention. I'm tired of people justifying their racism and hatred and diverting it to black people who, for the most part, mind their own business and positively contribute to society. Black people are a net positive to any community that gets the pleasure of being around them. Most black men and women are very upstanding individuals. Do you know the level of discipline most black families have to go through just to try to fit into America from back in the day? It doesn't matter how hard we try, how much we contribute, what we do, everything we accomplish, what we invent. No matter what, it still comes back down to this weird focus and obsession with hating black people. And I don't get it. This video is in response to the looting headlines circling LA. They're saying that looting is occurring in LA while these fires are going on. I'm sure there is. However, the only video that came out was a bunch of black people in a house moving stuff out of the house with fire trucks and policemen all around the house. So you truly believe that these people are robbing a house right in front of policemen and firemen? So the neighborhood is too nice. It can't be their house they're moving their stuff out of, very calmly, walking very slowly. What is this weird societal obsession with taking all your rage and hatred out on the black community? I don't understand it. We have put up with this all of our lives, and it still continues today. It doesn't matter how successful we get. It doesn't matter how much we contribute. These are the same headlines that I saw as a kid that made me not want to be black, because I was taught by America to hate myself because black people are bad. Is the black community that profitable at the expense of how the world views them? Skit coming soon. And guess what? If people are looting and some of them happen to be black, they're bad people, not bad black people. Let's get that straight.
Yeah. So groupthink is just horrible, and you should stop doing it. Treat individual people by their individual actions and behavioral patterns, not by the groupthink you ascribe to them. That is ultimately irrational, hateful, bigoted, and I'm just going to say retarded. Because at the end of the day, hating someone, its entire group, for the behaviors of an outlier of that group is irrational and retarded and hateful and bigoted. And ultimately will get you nowhere in life. You will die a morbidly obese pile of lipids and shame, who reeks of shit and will never get laid successfully in their lifetime. This is just how the turntables. Anyway, see ya.